In 1619, a Dutch ship arrived at the port of Jamestown, Virginia. It carried 20 African slaves. They were the first slaves ever brought to what would become the United States of America. And they were not brought to grow cotton. Cotton would not exist as a slave crop for another 200 years. They were brought to grow this, a small green leaf that you can find in almost every gas station in America right now. Tobacco. Everything you were taught about American history is missing a piece. The piece they never told you. The piece that explains how a few hundred English settlers, in a swampy colony where most of them died of starvation, built the most powerful country on earth. It was not cotton, it was not gold, it was not freedom, it was not democracy. It was a leaf that funded the American Revolution, a leaf that paid George Washington's army, a leaf that built the first American fortunes, a leaf that, and this is the part they hide from you, directly created the American slave economy. By the year 1700, half of every dollar that flowed into the American colonies came from tobacco. By the year 1800, American tobacco was a quarter of the entire global trade, and by the year 1900, it had killed more human beings than every war in American history combined. This is the story of the plant that built America, the plant that killed America, and the plant that nobody wants to remember. This is the real history of tobacco. Our story begins in a place that should not have existed. Imagine you are alive in the year 1610. You are an Englishman, 23 years old. Your name is Thomas, and you have just made the worst decision of your life. 3 years ago, you boarded a ship in London. You were promised land, wealth, a new beginning, in a place called Virginia, in a colony called Jamestown. When you arrived, there were 104 men with you. Today, only 38 are still alive. The rest died of starvation, of disease, of attacks by people whose land you stole, of drinking water from a swamp that was poisoned with your own waste. You eat rats. You eat shoe leather. There are stories of men eating each other to survive. This is not the founding of America that they showed you in school. This is the truth. Jamestown was not a glorious beginning. It was a death camp, a failed business venture. The investors back in London were preparing to abandon it. Until a man named John Rolfe arrived. John Rolfe was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was a farmer, and he had brought with him a handful of seeds. The seeds were illegal. He had smuggled them out of Trinidad, from a Spanish plantation, where any non-Spaniard caught with these seeds was executed on the spot. The seeds were tobacco, but not the bitter, harsh tobacco that the local Virginian natives smoked. This was something different, a sweeter strain, a milder strain, a strain that Europeans would pay anything for. John Rolfe planted his seeds in the Virginia soil, and by 1614, 3 years later, the first shipment of Jamestown tobacco arrived in London. The English smoked it, and they went insane. Within 5 years, tobacco had become the most fashionable substance in Europe. Kings smoked it, nobles smoked it, doctors prescribed it as medicine. Every coffee house in London was choked with tobacco smoke. The price exploded. In 1620, a pound of Jamestown tobacco sold in London for the equivalent of an entire year's wages for an English worker. The investors who had been ready to abandon Virginia suddenly couldn't get there fast enough. Every ship leaving Bristol and Plymouth was packed with new settlers. The death camp had become a gold rush. Thomas, our starving Englishman, was suddenly a wealthy man. He owned land. He grew tobacco. He sent the leaves back to England in exchange for silver coins. For the first time in his life, he had a future, but there was a problem. Tobacco is the most labor-intensive crop ever cultivated. Every leaf must be planted by hand, watered by hand, picked by hand, cured by hand, sorted by hand, packed by hand. 1 acre of tobacco requires 400 hours of human labor every year, and there weren't enough people in Virginia to do the work. The English colonists had a solution. They tried indentured servants, white workers from England who came to America for free, in exchange for 7 years of forced labor. It wasn't enough. They tried Native Americans, forced them to work the fields. The natives escaped, or died. It wasn't enough. The investors back in London were screaming for more tobacco. The price kept rising. The demand was endless. And so, in 1619, that Dutch ship arrived at Jamestown. 20 African slaves walked off the deck. It was not yet legal in Virginia to own a human being. It would be within 20 years. And the plant that made it happen was tobacco. Our second story moves forward, 150 years, to the year 1769. You are a man named James. You are 28 years old, and you are about to be worked to death. You were born in West Africa, in a village your grandfather had lived in for 90 years. When you were 16, slave traders came in the night. They burned your village. They killed your father. They put you in chains. You were marched 200 miles to the coast. You were packed into the hold of a ship with 300 other men. 2/3 of them died in the crossing. You survived. You were sold in Charleston for 90 pounds sterling to a tobacco plantation in Virginia. That was 12 years ago. You have been working tobacco ever since. Let me describe your day. You wake up at 4 in the morning, before sunrise. You walk to the fields in the dark. The work begins at the first light. You bend over each tobacco plant. You pick the worms off the leaves, one by one, by hand. Every single leaf, every single plant. If you miss one worm, and the plant is damaged, you are whipped. The sun rises. The Virginia humidity climbs to 90%. The temperature climbs to 100 degrees. You keep working. You pick the leaves. You carry them to the curing barn. You hang them on racks. You tend the fires that dry them. The smoke fills your lungs. Your eyes burn. Your skin cracks. When the leaves are dried, you sort them. By size, by color, by quality. Wrong sort, and you are whipped. You pack them into wooden barrels called hogsheads. Each hogshead weighs 1,000 pounds. You roll them to the river. You load them onto ships. The ships sail to London. In London, a wealthy man pays a fortune for them. He smokes them at his dinner party. You never see a coin. You sleep on a dirt floor. You eat corn and salt pork. You watch your friends die of exhaustion, of disease, of the whip. You are 28 years old. You will be dead by 40. The average tobacco slave in Virginia in 1769 lives about half as long as a free man. And here is the thing nobody told you. The man who owns you is a founding father of the United States. The wealthiest tobacco planters in colonial America became the wealthiest men in America. They built mansions. They built libraries. They built private armies of dozens, sometimes hundreds of slaves. And when the time came, they led a revolution. George Washington owned a tobacco plantation. 300 slaves. Thomas Jefferson owned a tobacco plantation. 600 slaves. James Madison owned a tobacco plantation. 100 slaves. Patrick Henry, James Monroe. Almost every founding father from Virginia owned slaves who grew tobacco. When they wrote the words, "All men are created equal," James was picking tobacco worms in their fields. When they signed the Declaration of Independence, it was paid for, in part, by James's labor. When they fought the American Revolution, they funded it by selling James's tobacco to French and Dutch merchants who hated the British. James dies in 1782, 3 years before the Constitution is written. He never tasted freedom. He never saw a school. He never knew the name of his grandfather. But the country he built will become the most powerful nation in human history on the back of his work. Our third story takes us to a different decade, to a different America. The year is 1880. The Civil War is over. Slavery is officially ended. But the tobacco fields of the American South are still being worked by black men and women. They are not called slaves anymore. They are called sharecroppers. They work the same fields. They live in the same shacks. They are paid in credit at the plantation store. They owe more money each year than they earn. They cannot leave. It is slavery with a new name. But our story is not about them. Our story is about a young man in North Carolina named James Buchanan Duke. He is 24 years old, the son of a small tobacco farmer. His father fought for the Confederacy and came home with nothing. But James Buchanan Duke has an idea. For 3 centuries, tobacco has been sold as a leaf. You buy a pouch, you roll it in paper, you smoke it, or you put it in a pipe. The whole process is slow, inconvenient, Most Americans don't smoke at all. Duke sees a machine, just invented, by a man named James Bonsack. The machine can roll cigarettes, pre-made, automatically. 200 cigarettes per minute, the equivalent of 50 hand rollers working at full speed. Nobody wants the machine. It keeps breaking. The cigarettes are uneven. The major tobacco companies refuse to buy one. James Buchanan Duke buys 2 of them, and then he does something nobody had ever done before. He starts advertising. Tobacco had always been sold by word of mouth, by reputation, by region. Duke prints millions of leaflets. He puts up billboards. He pays the most famous actresses of the day to be photographed holding cigarettes. He gives cigarettes away free, to soldiers, to workers, to women who had never smoked before. He invents the modern American marketing industry. Tobacco is the first product ever to be marketed at industrial scale. By 1890, James Buchanan Duke controls 40% of the entire American tobacco market. By 1900, he controls 90%. His company is called the American Tobacco Company, and it has become, by far, the largest corporation in the United States. Bigger than Standard Oil, bigger than the railroads. The U.S. government will eventually break it up, by force, using anti-monopoly laws, the same laws that broke up John D. Rockefeller. But by then, the damage was done. Duke had taught America to smoke. In 1880, before Duke's machines, the average American smoked less than half a cigarette per day. By 1950, 70 years later, the average American smoked 9 cigarettes per day. A nation of non-smokers had been turned into a nation of addicts. And what happened next is the darkest chapter of this entire story, because the people running the tobacco companies already knew. In 1953, an internal memo from R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company stated, in writing, that cigarettes caused cancer. In 1954, the chief scientist of Philip Morris confirmed in writing that nicotine was addictive. In 1962, the British Royal College of Physicians published a definitive study linking cigarettes to lung cancer. The tobacco industry's response? They didn't deny it. They funded fake research. They hired their own scientists. They created the first organized misinformation campaign in modern history. They convinced the American public that the science was uncertain for 40 more years. During those 40 years, over 12 million Americans died from smoking. 12 million. That is more than every American killed in every war the country has ever fought, combined. The Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of them, combined. 12 million Americans killed by a product the companies knew was killing them, for profit. The same plant that built America in 1614 was killing Americans by the hundreds of thousands every year, and nobody stopped it. So how does this story end? It doesn't. Today, in 2026, over 30 million Americans still smoke. The tobacco industry is still profitable, still operating, still selling. It has shifted. Vapes, e-cigarettes, nicotine pouches, new names, new shapes, same addiction, same money. A leaf that built the most powerful nation on earth. A leaf that built the American slave economy. A leaf that funded the American Revolution. A leaf that made the first American billionaire. A leaf that killed 12 million Americans. A leaf that, right now, in this exact moment, is being smoked, somewhere, by someone in your country. So next time you see a cigarette, or a pack at the gas station, or a person smoking outside a building, I want you to remember what you're really looking at. You are looking at the foundation of the United States of America. You are looking at the reason George Washington had an army. You are looking at the chain that bound a man named James to a Virginia field. You are looking at the product that turned a nation of farmers into a nation of addicts. You are looking at the plant that built America, and then quietly, over 400 years, killed more Americans than every enemy combined. And nobody ever taught you. Nobody told you. Nobody mentioned it. Because the history we are taught is not the real history. The real history is hidden in the small things. In the gas station, in the ashtray, in the things we never think about. This was Spice Lore. If this changed the way you see the world, hit subscribe. Because next week, we're telling a story even more insane. A story about a single flower in 1637. That broke an entire economy. A flower so valuable, men sold their houses to buy a single bulb. A flower that caused the world's first financial crash. The story of tulip mania. Welcome to Spice Lore, the lore of the things you thought you knew.